Here's something that hasn't happened a lot in the last 100 years. A country fights a war against a coalition of larger and more populated countries and defeats them in 6 days. That is exactly what happened in 1967 when Israel beat the Arab coalition in the Six-Day War. This war is one of the most important events that happened in the Middle East since the Second World War. From a country that is weak, small, frightened and surrounded by enemies, Israel became no longer weak, not as small and, well, still surrounded by enemies. This was the birth of Israel as a regional military power. A power that kept its neighbors at bay, except for what happened at 1973. But that is not the subject of today. Today's subject is Israel's occupied territories. And that started with the Six-Day War. So what are the occupied territories? This is where things might get complicated because it actually depends on who you ask. But despite that, we will try and do this in a precise manner. So, first, the facts that no one will dispute. During the Six-Day War, Israel has captured the following: from Syria the Golan Heights, from Egypt the Sinai Peninsula and the Gaza Strip, and from Jordan East Jerusalem and the West Bank, or as it's called in Israel, Judea and Samaria. So we have a total of 5 captured territories, but not all people call these 5 territories occupied. Many people don't even understand why we need to define a territory as occupied, because if a country captures a piece of land, isn't it just kind of part of them now? Well, no, not exactly. The world isn't a game of Civilization 6. Take the US for example. They occupied Iraq, but that doesn't mean that Iraq became part of the USA. What a country does with its captured territories depends on what its interests are and on what it can get away with. So back to Israel's occupation. Let's start with the Sinai Desert. This is a pretty large piece of land relative to Egypt and especially to Israel, and it is super strategically important for 2 main reasons. First of all, the side that holds the Sinai brings the fighting closer to the enemy. Egypt, without the Sinai, has the Israeli army very close to Cairo, for instance. The second reason that the Sinai is important is that it borders on the Suez Canal, which is the only way for vessels to go from the Mediterranean Sea to the Far East without going all the way around Africa. No one would call the Sinai Desert occupied territory today. Why? Because Israel has returned it to Egypt. Technically, this happened twice, because Israel has returned it after capturing it once before the Six-Day War as well. But let's not get into that. The Israeli narrative goes pretty much like this. Israel is a peace-loving nation, and that is why it was willing to return large territories for peace. The Egyptian narrative does pretty much like this. Egypt has waged a successful war against Israel in 1973 and pretty much forced it to return to Sinai. Now to the second piece of land capture from Egypt, the Gaza Strip. Things get a little more complicated here because, as we've seen, Israel captured it from Egypt, but Egypt has since renounced its claim on the Gaza Strip. This means that technically there is no widely recognized sovereign power that claims Gaza as part of itself. Only after the Oslo Accords were signed in 1993, the Palestinian Authority received administrative control of the Strip. The Oslo Accords were also the thing that legitimized the Palestinian Authority as the recognized representative of the Palestinian people. But still, the Palestinian Authority is not considered a sovereign state, at least not as I am recording this. So the Palestinian Authority became the administrator of the Gaza Strip. But then in 2005, Israel unilaterally disengaged from the Gaza Strip. And then Hamas, which is different than the Palestinian Authority and that is considered by many countries to be a terrorist organization, took over the Strip and kicked the Palestinian Authority out of it. In response to this turn of events, Israel has blockaded the Gaza Strip. Egypt contributed to the blockade as well from their side. So here's where the status of Gaza becomes somewhat confusing. Israel claims that since it disengaged from Gaza, it bears no responsibility for it and cannot be considered an occupier. But since Israel blockades Gaza and controls its airspace, most in the international community still view Israel as responsible for Gaza and as an occupier. Many would even claim that Israel has turned Gaza into a huge prison, though Israel claims its behavior is in self-defense from Hamas, the known terrorist organization. So anyways, these are the territories captured from Egypt. Next up, Syria. What did Israel capture from Syria? The Golan Heights. Now, things are simple in the Golan Heights. Why? Because nobody cares about Syria. Unlike Egypt, Syria doesn't have a decent relationship with the West and doesn't have the Suez Canal, so no one would care even more. The Golan Heights is a very important strategic location since it is a mountainous region that separates Israel and Syria, two hostile countries, so naturally both countries would prefer to have the high ground. It is probably for this reason that Syria has never accepted the fact that Israel holds the Golan Heights. To make things even more complex, Israel has actually officially annexed the Golan Heights, meaning that, unlike the Sinai and the Gaza Strip, Israel considers the Golan Heights to be part of itself and claims to be its sovereign. Syria, of course, also still claims the land for itself, although they can no longer contest it seriously, being weak and busy with their civil war and whatnot. As of right now, the only two countries that recognize Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights are Israel itself and the USA. At any rate, this piece of land is actually not closely related to the Israel-Palestine issue, and if you look closely at the Hamas logo, you will see that the entire land of Israel, which they claim, is missing something: the Golan Heights. This happens for a few reasons. First, the Golan Heights is not home to a large Palestinian population. Second, Syria is considered hostile to Israel and supportive of Hamas, so the Palestinians think that it should probably not be angered. Third, Syria still claims the Golan Heights, unlike Egypt that has completely forsaken the Gaza Strip. So why mess with the Arab neighbors? Am I right? Okay, so that was the Golan Heights. Up next, the complicated part. Yeah, this was the simple stuff so far. On to the territories that Israel has captured from Jordan. These are the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Starting with Jerusalem, Jordan no longer claims it for its own, which means, again, that technically there is no sovereign state that claims East Jerusalem as its own occupied territory. Israel has actually annexed it, meaning that Israel sees East Jerusalem as part of itself. Not only that, but Israel actually sees the unified Jerusalem as its capital city. The modern state of Israel sees itself as the successor to the ancient Hebrew kingdoms, so it makes sense to see Jerusalem as the capital. But again, this is where the Palestinians come in. They see East Jerusalem as their future capital city, even though the Palestinian leadership actually sits in Ramallah. But still, Jerusalem, or as they call it, Al-Quds, is considered to be an extremely important location to the entire Muslim world. It is no coincidence that the Dome of the Rock became a dominant symbol of the Palestinian struggle against Israel. The international community also does not recognize the sovereignty of Israel over East Jerusalem. That is why most embassies in Israel are actually located in Tel Aviv and not in Jerusalem. And if you think that was complicated, wait until you hear about the West Bank, which you might say that East Jerusalem was technically a part of. It is a far bigger piece of land than both the Gaza Strip and the Golan Heights. Only Sinai was larger, but we've already said that Israel doesn't control the Sinai. Anyway, before the Six-Day War, Jordan has actually annexed the West Bank, meaning that it saw it as a part of itself. But since then, Jordan has actually renounced its claim on the area, meaning that once again, technically, there is no sovereign recognized country that claims it as its own, and that actually includes Israel. Although there are many Israeli settlers living in the West Bank, Israel does not formally claim ownership over it. It has never been annexed, which means that there is no actual sovereign over it. This is further complicated by the fact that there has never actually been a Palestinian state, so there has never been Palestinian sovereignty over the West Bank. Literally, no sovereign country claims it. This is where the Oslo Accords come in once more. Let us remember that these accords made the Palestinian Authority the sole recognized representative of the Palestinian people. The West Bank is divided into what is called A, B, and C territories. In the A territories, the Palestinian Authority has both civil and security control. In the B territories, the Palestinian Authority has civil control while Israel has security control. In the C territories, Israel has both security and civil control. Just like the Sinai Desert, the West Bank gives Israel strategic depth that gives it more breathing room in case of a war. A hostile power sitting in the area would be a huge threat right next to Israel's heart and could easily cut it in half. So those were what is called the occupied territories, but many in Israel would say that some of these places should not be called occupied because these lands are a rightful part of Israel. On the other hand, many would say that this definition is too restrictive because there are actually more occupied territories than we have seen here. The Palestinians claim, for example, that the entirety of the land that constitutes Israel is occupied, even the land that was Israel's before the Six-Day War. This was the cause of the First Arab-Israeli War of 1948, in which neighboring Arab countries invaded Israel. This happened pretty much as soon as it declared its independence. Why invade? Because many of them believe that Israel has never been a legitimate country. There was no post-1967 occupation back then. Remember Hamas's symbol from before? It doesn't only claim the territories lost during the Six-Day War, it claims everything. And you might say, okay, it's just Hamas, they're extremists, they're terrorists. But here is the symbol of Fatah, which is the most powerful organization in the Palestinian Authority, which is considered more moderate. We see here, again, that the entire land is claimed. And by the way, no Golan Heights here either. So this has been my attempt to explain the deal with the occupied territories as accurately as I could. Thanks for watching, bye.